Mayor Tillman, this next question goes to you first. Has there ever been an unbiased study on the links of fracking to the claimed environmental effects? Why or why not? I live in Grand Prairie in the Barnett Shale. There are dozens of wells within 1 square mile of me. No flaming water, no earthquakes. I know Chesapeake is fracking. Why don't I experience the claims the anti-fracking activists claim?
Well, there actually is lots of studies. Now that you mention it. Since you asked.
Don't forget this one, Mayor.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Analysis of RWC and VOC data here in the Barnett Shale. This was done by, it was prepared for Ramon Alvarez of the Environmental Defense Fund. There was a study done, and some of the stuff's been peer reviewed. Well, look, here's another PhD. Community health risk analysis of oil and gas industry impacts in Garfield County. It's Teresa Coons, PhD. She a fraud too?
Probably admitted she is, but the previous one was a fraud. He asked me a question. Is she a fraud? I'm just responding.
I'm not here asking between you two.
He asked a question, and I feel I'd be letting down the audience if I didn't answer his question. So you're admitting that this was a fraud?
No, I didn't say that. And I apologize. I shouldn't have helped you. So there's lots of reports from both in the Barnett Shale and around the country. And you're more than welcome to take a look at these. I've got quite a collection that you might want to look at. Some of these, like I said, were VTEX removal from natural gas streams. That was done by the University of Oklahoma. Here's some profile oil and gas extraction industry. VOC emissions from oil and gas condensate tanks. Here's the one from Garfield County, Colorado. Oh, here's the exemptions of oil and gas from the EPA. Impacts of gas drilling on human health. Birth outcomes in maternal residential proximity to natural gas development in rural Colorado. Highly elevated atmospheric levels of volatile organics in the Inton Basin, Utah. Benzene guidelines. This is from the Norwegian oil and gas. Over there, they actually admit that there's benzene in the products, and they work to get it out. Imagine that. MSDS sheets. On and on. Doesn't this kind of look like a scene from your show?
Am I allowed, when you ask a question, am I allowed to answer? That's one of the rules.
I'm done, and it's your turn.
I really don't understand the rules. I'm being asked questions, but I'm perfectly willing to answer them. I have a question maybe for the audience about American etiquette, because obviously I'm not too good on American etiquette, this whole title thing. So if you claim to have a fraudulent PhD and Mayor Tillman accepts it, are you allowed then to call yourself a PhD forever? It's just, because that's just so this American etiquette just confuses me sometimes. So, I don't know. The EPA went into Denver, Pennsylvania. The TCEQ went into Dish, Texas. The EPA went into Pavilion, Wyoming. And they pulled out and said, the water is safe. And you know what? Let me paint a little scene for you. Craig Southner telling you there are 3 types of uranium in his water, 2 of them weapons grade. Sitting at a table, in all seriousness, and then saying to you, would you like to drink my water? In a really angry voice. Who would drink the water from someone who's telling you there's 3 types of uranium in a 2 of its weapons grade? I mean, does that not sound like something you should avoid rather than move towards? So, and explain another thing. I'm not, as I say, I'm not from America, but in Ireland, if you think there's something wrong with your water, and the top scientists in the land come and tell you your water is safe, in Ireland we don't get upset, we celebrate. Why don't you get upset when you're told your water is safe? Does Doesn't that sound counterintuitive? Of course, you know, if your water's clean, it's wonderful. But if you're involved in a lucrative multi-million-dollar lawsuit against an oil and gas company, it's a disaster. You get upset. If you're involved in celebrities coming and hugging you, Mark Ruffalo, Susan Sarandon, it's a disaster.
All right, this next question is, Mayor Tillman, should try to go first, and this is directed to you. If you grew up in the oil patch, how were you able to stay healthy enough to reach your present age?
That's a very good question, because in the Barnett Shale and most of the oil shales, and you can look at the Barnett Shale to see how things are going to progress over time. And if you look at just the pure density of the activity and all the infrastructure that goes into place to support all of those wells, the oil field I grew up in was more like your older oil fields. You had a well here, a well here. It wasn't put 200 feet from the park. It wasn't put in somebody's backyard. It was put far enough away that it didn't impact anybody. And so what we have going on in the Barnett Shale was nothing like the oil field that I grew up in. And so you just really can't compare the two.
Well, I mean, you can actually, compare the two. I live in LA now, you know, there are oil wells in the middle of LA. They fracked for oil 40 years ago under Beverly Hills High School. Beverly Hills High School. Now, people are very healthy in Beverly Hills. People live well in Beverly Hills, apart from some dodgy plastic surgery. But, you know, in general, they live good in Beverly Hills. They live, you know, I mean, this is a true story about Beverly Hills. I was talking to a gentleman, and he was talking about playing tennis with his father. I looked at him, you're playing tennis with your father? I said, what age are you? I'm 80. What age is your father? He's 105. Right? Well done. And he says, when he was 100, we contacted the local paper to say, come out and do a story on my father, he's 100. They wouldn't come out. There's too many people aged 100. He said, if we did that in that area, there'd be nothing but people's 100-year-old fathers. Come call us back when he's 105. And there's active oil wells in Beverly Hills as we speak. So I live on top, I think I live okay, I live on top of abandoned oil wells. I mean, America, the more oil America has taken out of the ground, the healthier you've got. If you want a healthy country, give them fossil fuels. Allow them to use their fossil fuels. In fact, don't allow them, this is none of your business. Allow them to do the same thing that you did, exploit your resources. How are you going to get Africans to build cities and universities and hospitals? With renewables? You know, if Mayor Tillman or any of these other renewable supporters really think renewables are the way ahead, then they need, the next time that their child is in hospital, needs a hospital appointment or surgery, or their mother needs surgery, they need to say, I insist that she's only treated in a hospital powered by renewables. Would you like your mother on the operating table worrying that the sun is going to go behind the clouds or the wind will stop blowing? No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't put any relative of yours in a hospital powered by renewables. Well, if you wouldn't do it, it's not good enough for anybody else in America, it's not good enough for anybody in Africa, it's not good enough for anybody in Asia. This is not good enough. We, in Europe and America, exploited our natural resources, became healthy, wealthy, prosperous. We became the most healthiest and most prosperous civilization in the history of the world. And it's wrong to deny that. Equality of opportunity, there's a word that's very prevalent now, equality of opportunity, equality. To deny that equality to people in Africa and Asia. Why are we denying that? Is it because they're black and brown? We don't think that they should exploit their resources the same way we did? What is the reason? Don't they have the same rights as human beings that we do? Maybe they don't. Maybe it's because they're black and brown, they don't. I don't know. That's not the way I feel, but that's the effect of these campaigns.
Mr. McAleer, this next question goes to you first, and it's directed to you. 30 cities in North Texas are worried enough about the dangers of fracking to design their own setbacks and ordinances. Do you think these cities have no science to back these decisions?
I'm not, I'm not sure. The cities are entitled to do what they want, but I'm not sure that we should, that politics should be attached to science. These are political referendums. I'm not sure that they don't prove or disprove science. You know, we can have Chris Christie putting an Ebola patient in quarantine, the federal government saying don't. Who's right there? Mark Cuomo putting a patient in quarantine, the CDC saying no. This is politics, it's not science, you know. Among them be it, as they say in Ireland. So, yeah, 30 cities have done it. I don't know if that fact is true. I've heard a lot of facts tonight that aren't true. I don't know if that fact is true. But I'm not going to, no one should pretend that that's a scientific decision. It's a political decision. So that's, politics is very often not based on, well, it's not based on science, but it's often based on irrational fears and that. But they're not irrational, they're fears because people like Calvin Tillman are spreading those fears. Sorry, Mayor Tillman are spreading those fears. And, you know, so they're not irrational in that sense because, you know, how can you argue against, what was that phrase? You know, all these phrases, you know, destroying his property, destroying his surface. He talked about his children having nosebleeds, moving out for the good of his family. You know, how do you know, it's very hard for a politician to argue that. Do you want, you know, you accuse me of wanting to assault children. I mean, it's like, do you beat your wife? I mean, no, I don't. I mean, how can you argue? How can a politician argue? So you're for attacking children. You know, the first thing a politician is going to do, no, I'm not for that. Let's introduce these regulations. Doesn't mean it's a scientific slam dunk, means it's a political slam dunk. Thanks.
Mayor Tillman?
Please read the question again, if you don't mind. I'm sorry.
30 cities in North Texas are worried enough about the dangers of fracking to design their own setbacks and ordinances. Do you think these cities have no science to back these decisions?
Well, first and foremost, I think that the role of government is to protect people's constitutional rights, protect people's property rights, and so ordinances are put in place to do that. And so you wouldn't have something like a 12 compressor engine in a residential neighborhood, in theory. We didn't have a choice in that, but so you would want to put that in an area that is less invasive, or maybe you don't want it in your city at all. And it's up to local officials to be able to make the decisions that their citizens want them to make. You know, when I was in Dish, when I was the mayor, many of these state agencies came in and talked to us. Many people from the industry came in and talked to us. And I always told them, I'm going to be the nicest person you meet. And I'm going to be the most reasonable person you meet. Because once my citizens get a hold of you, they're going to tear you to shreds. It wasn't me on my own that was out here in front of this. It was me being pushed by my citizens who also wanted their property rights protected. And so that was my role as mayor, was to protect that.
You know, did you hear Mayor Tillman say you don't have the right to destroy his property, destroy the surface? He hasn't produced one iota of evidence of his property being destroyed, his surface being destroyed. He's produced a fraudulent report, he's produced a TCEQ report which says that there's nothing wrong with the air, the water, and the surface of his town. But yet he throws out these phrases. And this is, I mean, it's very hard to argue with those kind of phrases. You know, they're very emotive, but there's no science behind them. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to make FrackNation, was because there was all these allegations out there and anecdotes and lawsuits out there. And the media was so glad to cover them. You know, and this is something journalists need to look at how they do business. You know, an anecdote is not a fact. A lawsuit is not a fact, and it's an allegation. In fact, it's not even an allegation, because a lawsuit is a heavily biased allegation because there's the hope of a payout of millions of dollars. So you have to treat a lawsuit with utmost skepticism. You know, and that's why I decided to make FrackNation. So when someone who's hoping to profit by millions of dollars tells you they've got 3 types of uranium in their water, 2 of them weapons grade. You know, you have to laugh, or as a journalist, not laugh, but really investigate those claims and investigate them to the very nth degree. And you know, when someone says you don't have the right to destroy his property, destroy the surface. I mean, someone bought Mayor Tillman's house after he left. Did he think the surface was destroyed? Did he think? I mean, it's irrelevant what he thinks. It doesn't matter what he thinks. I don't care what people think. It's about the science. And there's no science anywhere to show that fracking destroyed Calvin Tillman's property or destroyed the surface of his property. And he needs to withdraw these kind of claims. It's not true, Mayor Tillman. Please stop saying that. It's unfair, it's unethical, and you know, people deserve better. So please stop it. Please withdraw that claim now that fracking destroyed your property and destroyed the surface of your property. It didn't. You know it didn't. Thank you.
All right, Mr. McAleer, this next question goes to you first, and it's pertinent to you. Do they allow hydraulic fracturing in Ireland? If so, why are you not promoting fracking in Ireland?
At the moment, they do not allow hydraulic fracking in Ireland. But not they don't allow it. Actually, they in Southern Ireland, they're allowing them to invest. It's a very young industry in Ireland, you know. So it hasn't. They're still investigating there. Southern Ireland, they're investigating. In Northern Ireland, they've stopped them investigating. So it's a mixed bag, north and south. What was the second part of the question? Why am I not?
The second part was, if they do allow it, why are you not promoting fracking in Ireland?
I just want to make it clear, I am not promoting fracking. I don't care about fracking, I don't care about the oil and gas industry, I don't care about oil and gas industry profits. I also don't care about farmers and their profits, and I don't care about their land either. I left a farm, I don't want to go back to a farm, I live in a city now, I like it. You know, the nights are very long and dark in farms, you know, they're cold. But I don't care about farmers. You know, I'm a journalist. It's not my job to care. You know, tell me a sob story, and this is very simple. Tell me a sob story, and I won't cry. I'll write it down and get it out on the internet or on TV or wherever way I'm putting it out after I check it. That's my job. You know, if you want a friend, get a dog. Don't get a journalist. You know. You know. My job is to find the facts. It's not to promote something, or to denigrate something, or to attack something. So, I would never dream of promoting fracking in Ireland, and I don't dream of promoting fracking in America. I dream of promoting truth. That's why I went into journalism, to tell the truth. I come from Northern Ireland, where the truth, growing up during the Troubles, the truth was very important. People were doing very bad things for what they thought was the truth, sometimes it wasn't the truth. It's personal to me that I tell the truth, and the truth be told. So I'm not promoting anything, and never will. Thank you.
Mayor Tillman?
Thank you. That's a very good statement, Phelim. Unfortunately, I just don't buy that, because I've still asked, you know, I pointed out several questions, and in the beginning, I specifically said that there's going to be a lot of pontificating. There's going to be, what did I use? All foam and no beer. So there's been a lot of that going on, but he still hasn't answered the simple question as to what actually evidence disputes any of this. I've showed why I believe that the data that contained in the Dish report is valid, and it's because of all these other reports.
Excuse me, though, that's not really the question. We're talking here about hydraulic fracturing in Ireland, and if it is allowed, why is he not promoting it there?
Well, that's going to be completely up to him. I know that it's been a hot topic around Europe. I've actually been on a few radio shows in Ireland, actually, and I know that it's a hot topic over there. I think that a lot of people in Europe want to look and try to get that full picture of this before they jump into this. I think that America jumped into this without really having a plan, without really having a significant amount of data, and so we're catching up with that. So people are looking at what we do in order to make their decisions, and they're taking their time with that. And I think that they're doing the right thing in doing that, and they're taking their time and reviewing things like this, and watching movies like Mr. McAleer puts out, so that they can get a full picture of what they're getting themselves into. Because once it gets started, the train's going, and it's going to be hard to stop the train once it's going. And so it's good that they take a look at this. One thing in a lot of European countries and a lot of countries around the United States is there's not mineral interests owned by the public or owned by the people. It's owned by the government. And frankly, when you don't have most of the people who are jumping up and down, beating on the table that we have to do this, typically from my experience, they've had a financial interest in it. And so when you take that away from someplace like Ireland, where the people who's going to have their lands impacted, who's going to get to have all these studies made on their property, then they're not going to be able to get any benefit from that. And that has been a dividing factor here in Dish, Texas, or anywhere else. I mean, there's very few people who had mineral interest, but they were a lot more tolerant of that. So they were getting money. Thanks.
All right, before we continue, I just want to call everybody's attention. It's just about 8:30. We had announced originally this would end at 8:30. However, Ms. Gamble informed me that we can go a little bit over. I still have a lot of questions here. At the end, we want to give each one of the debaters 3 minutes to wrap up and make closing comments. So I'm going to take a few more questions. And Ms. Gamble, if we get to a point where you think we need to start wrapping it up, please indicate to me.
Yeah.
Is that okay with you guys?
I was just double checking. He had acted like we needed to get going, so I just wanted to make sure he didn't have another.
That's fine.
All right, this next question is, Mayor Tillman, it's your turn to go first, and this is directly to you. If you grew up in the oil patch, how were you able to stay healthy enough to reach your present age?
That's a very good question, because in the Barnett Shale and most of the oil shales, and you can look at the Barnett Shale to see how things are going to progress over time. And if you look at just the pure density of the activity and all the infrastructure that goes into place to support all of those wells, the oil field I grew up in was more like your older oil fields. You had a well here, a well here. It wasn't put 200 feet from the park. It wasn't put in somebody's backyard. It was put far enough away that it didn't impact anybody. And so what we have going on in the Barnett Shale was nothing like the oil field that I grew up in. And so you just really can't compare the two.
All right, Mr. McAleer.
Well, I mean, you can actually. You can compare the two. I live in LA now. You know, there are oil wells in the middle of LA. They fracked for oil 40 years ago under Beverly Hills High School. Beverly Hills High School. Now, people are very healthy in Beverly Hills. People look well in Beverly Hills, apart from some dodgy plastic surgery. But, you know, in general, they look good in Beverly Hills. They lived, you know, this is a true story about Beverly Hills. I was talking to a gentleman, and he was talking about playing tennis with his father. I looked at him, you're playing tennis with your father? And I said, what age are you? He says, I'm 80. What age is your father? He's 105. Right? I said, well done. And he says, when he was 100, we contacted the local paper to say, come back and do a story on my father, he's 100. They wouldn't come out. There's too many people aged 100. He said, well, if we did that in that area, there'd be nothing but people's 100-year-old fathers. Call us back when he's 105. And there's active oil wells in Beverly Hills as we speak. So I live on top, I think I live okay. I live on top of abandoned oil wells. I mean, America, the more oil that America has taken out of the ground, the healthier you've got. If you want a healthy country, give them fossil fuels. Allow them to use their fossil fuels. In fact, don't allow them, this is none of your business. Allow them to do the same thing that you did, exploit your resources. How are you going to get Africans to build cities and universities and hospitals? With renewables? You know, if Mayor Tillman or any of these other renewable supporters really think renewables are the way ahead, then they need, the next time that their child is in hospital, needs a hospital appointment or surgery, or their mother needs surgery, they need to say, I insist that she's only treated in a hospital powered by renewables. Would you like your mother on the operating table worrying that the sun is going to go behind the clouds or the wind will stop blowing? No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't put any relative of yours in a hospital powered by renewables. Well, if you wouldn't do it, it's not good enough for anybody else in America, it's not good enough for anybody in Africa, it's not good enough for anybody in Asia. This is not good enough. We, in Europe and America, exploited our natural resources, became healthy, wealthy, prosperous. We became the most healthiest and most prosperous civilization in the history of the world. And it's wrong, wrong, wrong to deny that. Equality of opportunity, there's a word that's very prevalent now, equality of opportunity, equality. To deny that equality to people in Africa and Asia. Why are we denying that? Is it because they're black and brown? We don't think that they should exploit their resources the same way we did? What is the reason? Don't they have the same rights as human beings that we do? Maybe they don't. Maybe it's because they're black and brown, they don't. I don't know. That's not the way I feel, but that's the effect of these campaigns.
Mr. McAleer, this next question goes to you first, and it's directed to you. 30 cities in North Texas are worried enough about the dangers of fracking to design their own setbacks and ordinances. Do you think these cities have no science to back these decisions?
I'm not sure. The cities are entitled to do what they want, but I'm not sure that we should, that politics should be attached to science. These are political referendums. I'm not sure that they don't prove or disprove science. You know, we can have Chris Christie putting an Ebola patient in quarantine, the federal government saying don't. Who's right there? Maria Cuomo putting a patient in quarantine, the CDC saying no. This is politics, it's not science, you know. Among them be it, as they say in Ireland. So, yeah, 30 cities have done it. I don't know if that fact is true. I've heard a lot of facts tonight that aren't true. I don't know if that fact is true. But I'm not going to, no one should pretend that that's a scientific decision. It's a political decision. So that's, politics is very often not based well, it's not based on science, but it's often based on irrational fears and that. But they're not irrational. They're fears because people like Calvin Tillman are spreading those fears. Sorry, Mayor Tillman are spreading those fears, and you know, so they're not irrational in that sense because you know, how can you argue against what was that phrase? You know, all these phrases. You know. Destroy his property, destroy his surface. He talked about his children having nosebleeds, moving out for the good of his family. You know, how can you know, it's very hard for a politician to argue that. Do you want, you know, he accused me of wanting to assault children. I mean, it's like, do you beat your wife? I mean, no, I don't. I mean, how can you argue? How can a politician argue? So you're for attacking children. You know, the first thing a politician is going to do, no, I'm not for that. Let's introduce these regulations. Doesn't mean it's a scientific slam dunk. It means it's a political slam dunk. Thanks.
Mayor Tillman.
Please read the question again. I'm sorry.
30 cities in North Texas are worried enough about the dangers of fracking to design their own setbacks and ordinances. Do you think these cities have no science to back these decisions?
Well, first and foremost, I think that the role of government is to protect people's constitutional rights, protect people's property rights, and so ordinances are put in place to do that. And so you wouldn't have something like a 12 compressor engine in a residential neighborhood, in theory. We didn't have a choice in that, but so you would want to put that in an area that is less invasive, or maybe you don't want it in your city at all. And it's up to local officials to be able to make the decisions that their citizens want them to make. You know, when I was in Dish, when I was the mayor, many of these state agencies came in and talked to us
many people from the industry came in and talked to us. And I always told them, I'm going to be the nicest person you meet. And I'm going to be the most reasonable person you meet. Because once my citizens get a hold of you, they're going to tear you to shreds. And it happened every single time. I don't know if there's anybody from the industry that ever came to one of our meetings, but Calvin was out in front. Is it okay if I call myself Calvin? Calvin was out in front of this.
Another question.
Yeah.
If he's asking me a question, I'm to the moderator.
I'm talking to both of you.
I do think it's strange people referring to themselves in the third person, but each to his own.
Mr. McAleer, it's Mr. Tillman's turn to ask, and please, you guys
Mayor Tillman.
don't address each other directly.
It wasn't me on my own that was out here in front of this. It was me being pushed by my citizens who also wanted their property rights protected. And so that was my role as mayor, was to protect that. And you know, there is a great technology, and there's lots of things that the industry have done to develop that technology. And most everybody likes to have air conditioning when they turn on their air conditioning. They like to feel that cool air, especially here in Texas in the wintertime, or in the summertime. But I mean, I have a wind energy plan, but maybe other people don't. They want to feel that. But that does not give the industry the right to just trample over people. At some point, people have to matter. And if we just keep defending the bad things that the industry have done, this isn't going to get any better, guys. This is only going to get worse. There's going to be more animosity. There's going to be more pushback. If every single person that speaks out to you is called a liar and a fraud and all the things that I've been called here in just the last 30 minutes, that's not going to help you. That doesn't make you look better. Thank you.
All right, this next question, apparently, I'm guessing, comes from one of the STEM Club members, and I think it's pretty pertinent for this whole discussion. Mayor Tillman, this will go to you first. I would like, and I didn't realize you guys were candidates, but apparently you are, so I'm going to ask it as it's written. I would like to ask to hear each of the candidates thoroughly describe the hydraulic fracturing process from well completion to fluid and hydrocarbon recovery. Please describe either the breakdown of the process leading to water contamination or the industry precautions to prevent said contamination.
Wow, that's a big question.
Yes, it is.
So the first thing that happens, at least in a city, is they will go to the city and they will get a permit to drill a well. Once the permit's gotten, and there's a whole process that's in place for that. There's things that the city checks off on to determine if they've got the information from the Railroad Commission, et cetera. So there's a permitting process that they have to go to. Once they get the permitting process, they will come in and they will clear the pad. They will bring a well in, or a drilling rig in to drill a well. That typically, depending on the technology, that can go from 7 days to some of the older technology can go for a couple of weeks per well. They come in and they do they bring in the water depending on where you're at in the process, or where you're at in Dish. We were fortunate enough to not have to have everything trucked in, so we actually had ponds that they used to pump water out of, so we didn't have 100 idling trucks sitting there. But in some places they do have to have that many trucks full of water to do the frac. The frac would typically take a day or two per each well. And then once the fracking is done, there's a flowback period. There's usually a frac tank, which is one of those big square rectangle tanks that are sitting on the pad site collecting all of the flowback. So they pump, let's say 5 million gallons of water into the ground, and they'll get 1 million gallons back in flowback within the first 48 hours or 96 hours after the well's been fracked. Now, fortunately, in Dish, Devon Energy was the driller who did all the drilling in the Dish. So they did a flare. Now, when you live in some places like the Marcellus, they flare, which can be its own source of issues because it sounds kind of like a jet engine going off. So we didn't have to deal with that. And so then there's a tank battery placed on the well that's there, so they'll come and service that. Usually, especially in the beginning when the well's producing a lot, they will come and they will empty those tanks daily. There'll be a diesel tank truck come and empty it daily or twice a day. There's a lot more to the process than just that. Now you have to deal with those tanks, and if those tanks happen to be leaking, which I do have some nice videos of, if anybody would ever care to go to one of my websites and take a look at that. So then they move on to the next well. And so also on my website, there's some good aerial footage of what the Barnett Shale looks like. Right now, they've done that about 17,000 times.
Mr. McAleer?
Yeah, if you want to know the details of fracking, you could buy FrackNation, available on FrackNation.com, $19.99. You can watch it on Netflix. We spent about 7 minutes describing the process of fracking, and we also spend another 7 minutes showing the number of permits that people need to frack. It's amazing. You know, there's an environmental impact assessment, there's archaeological assessments, there's water testing, there's air testing, all these tests that have to be done before you can frack. So it's one of the most regulated industries on the planet, in one of the most regulated countries on the planet. The fracking itself, which is, as Mayor Tillman said, is a 2-day process, happens at, I think, 8,000 feet, but it depends on the particular, where the shale is, but generally it happens at 8,000 feet. I think in Marcellus happens at other places. But it's 8,000 feet down. The water table is 150 feet down. So, you know, unless they've reinvented the laws of gravity in America, whatever is in the frack at 8,000 feet cannot make it up to the water table. It's just, you know, practically impossible. So, again, but it sounds very scary, you know. And also, the thing is, it's been going on since 1947. That's one thing that hasn't been said. It's been going on from 1947. The idea of fracking, not the idea, the technique of fracking, of going down and using chemicals, air, and rock, and explosives to split open rock to get oil and gas out of it. And you know, the process gets better, not worse. And you know, there's been 1 million wells fracked in America, and there's never been one proven case of fracking have contaminated water ever. And it's not me saying that. That's the head of the EPA, whose name the previous head of the EPA, she told the Congress. Someone help me. Lisa Jackson, yes, Lisa Jackson, the former head of the EPA. Thank you. Free DVD for you, Dave. Lisa Jackson, Obama's head of the EPA, told Congress there's not been one example of fracking ever having contaminated water, ever. She said that under oath in front of Congress, and I think all of her qualifications are genuine, and she respects oaths, unlike some experts we know. So, it's not me who's saying it doesn't affect the water, it's Lisa Jackson. There's 1 million wells out there. It's a wonderful science experiment, actually. It's a great experiment, because very often, you know, a new technique comes along, you don't know, and you have to wait 10 or 20 years for the results to come in. This happened in 1947 first. It's been analysed, the science, the results are in. It's a safe process. We can all relax.
All right, we're getting very close to the time we need to wrap up here. I've still got 22 or 23 questions. I'm going to ask one more, and then after that we'll go into our close. Mr. McAleer, this goes to you first. And it's kind of long. I'm going to read it all, and I'll let you respond afterwards.
Paraphrase it.
I worked in research labs for 15 years where I witnessed widespread and rampant corruption, including outright falsification of data and extreme misogyny, white supremacism, class and classical youthism, I can't read this next word, homophobia, and even anti-Celicism. The argument, nothing that's been published in a peer-reviewed journal is as fraudulent as any too-big-to-fail banks or used car salesmen. Peer review is nothing more than a good old boys club, and the same good old boys club responsible for 500 years of genocide.
I don't know what anti-Celicism is, by the way. Does anyone help me?
Continued on the back. So
Okay.
let me read the rest of it. Maybe there's a question here somewhere. Against blacks and indigenous peoples and another millennium of genocide prior to that. The only reliable source of info is the testimonials of workers who have been adversely affected by this and every other brazen act of class warfare. Well, I didn't really hear a question there. If you want to make a comment on it, you're welcome.
Well, let's make quick comments because I don't think it really needs an answer if Mayor Tillman agrees. First of all, I don't know what anti-Celicism is, right? But it sounds terrible, and I'm against it. Okay, just on the record, in case anyone comes back and says to me that I'm a Celicist, I'm not. I'm anti-Celicist. I always have been. Okay, so actually, whoever that person is makes a good point. You know, it actually makes lots of terrible points, right? Terrible points. If there was so much corruption in these, why didn't you report it to the police, to the authorities? Where are the emails? Where's the evidence? Again, no evidence. But she talks about the workers. Actually, you know, I hope if there are any frackers here, I hope you don't mind me. I'm going to call you guinea pigs, right? You're the canaries in the coal mine. You know, if these million frack wells are this vast scientific experiment, you're the people that they sent in for the results. You know, there is no evidence that people who worked on fracking wells have any adverse medical effects. There's none, zero. I spoke to a doctor. It's possibly anecdotal, so I don't want to really, you know, it's not that anecdotal, but it's slightly anecdotal, so I don't want to attach any significance to it. But he said, since the oil and gas industry came to Marcellus, to Pennsylvania, he thinks that health has improved because people have got money in their pockets now and they're getting health insurance. So they're going to the doctor, fixing their knee, fixing their hip, fixing whatever it is need to be fixed. You know, getting checkups. So he thinks health has improved, but there's no science to back it up. It's just an observation by a doctor. So if fracking was awful, the people who would be showing the results of that are the frackers, are the workers, that gentleman there and other people. There's no evidence that fracking has hurt any worker or has any effect on their long-term health. You know, and I want to say to all those Celicists out there, stop it. Okay? This will not stand. Thank you.
All right. With this, I'd like to go ahead and let the two speakers wrap up a 3-minute closing statement. Mr. McAleer, by decision before the debate, you'll go first. Then then Mayor Calvin, and after that, we'll say thank you to everybody and appreciate your attendance.
Well, I want to thank everyone, the STEM people, the wonderfully unbiased moderator, and I mean that, actually, even laughing at some of my jokes, which is pretty good. Can't get better than that. He's laughing again. And I want to thank Mayor Tillman for coming. So, what do I have to say? I don't think I have anything fresh or new to say, you know, because my questions weren't answered. At the centre of Mayor Tillman's anti-fracking activism is a fraudulent report. The TCEQ said Dish is safe. The federal EPA said the water in Dimmock is safe. The federal EPA said the water in Pavilion, Wyoming is safe. Lisa Jackson, the head of Obama's EPA, said there's no evidence of fracking ever having contaminated water anywhere. I don't have anything to add to that. What can I add? Except I can talk about my own profession, my own trade, the journalism. Where were the journalists? You know, when someone from your local TV station goes out to someone who says, whatever the local equivalent of is, I've got 3 types of uranium in my water, 2 of them weapons grade, and you've heard them on your local TV station. My dog has died, my cat has died, my wife doesn't speak to me anymore, my granny's ill, I've got nosebleeds. You hear it all. And the reporter should, you know, nod and pretend to care, because that's what we do. And then ask for evidence. Ask for the doctor's report, the medical report, the scientific evidence. And if they did, they'd find it's not there. So I don't, you know, I've got 3 minutes to speak now, but I find myself, well, I've only got 1 minute to speak now, but I find myself thinking I've got nothing to say, because it's all been said by the EPA in Pavilion, Wyoming, the EPA in Dimock, Pennsylvania, and the, you know, Lisa Jackson. And Mayor Tillman, you know, may want to throw all the insults at me, but he needs to come not to me. If he wants to come to me, he needs to come through Lisa Jackson. He needs to come through the federal EPA and the TCEQ in Dallas. He needs to come through them first and say, I don't accept your reports. And then I have to say, on what basis? You know, are you smarter than all these scientists? And I'm not, it's not an ad hominem attack to say I don't think he is. He doesn't have a PhD, real or fake. You know, and many of the people and many of the journalists who are promoting this don't have PhDs either. I don't have a PhD, but I listen to those who do. So thank you for coming here, and thank you for listening to me, and hope you understood my accent. Good night.
I want to thank Mark. I want to thank Tim, and I also want to thank Mr. McAleer for coming out and doing this. I tend to disagree that there's not science out there. There may not be science that reflects what some want it to reflect, but I think there's science out there, and I think there's something out there that gives us a hint that this isn't all rosy, that fracking is not the cure for Ebola or anything else. But there's a downside to this. And until the industry decides that we're going to confront that, and we're going to try to make this better, you're going to have some of the same continued issues. You know, I did move from Dish because of the activity going on there. In Dish, because of many of these things, there was a lot of controls put in place. While the industry was attacking me, they were putting in environmental controls to capture some of the emissions. They were doing business better. And so the situation in Dish is better now than it was when this report was written, but it wouldn't have been better without that report. And so I'm glad that we did this, because before a lot of these reports were published, that report was published. And that report prompted some of these other studies, and it made us look into this. And right now, there's a permanent air monitor in Dish that was installed to monitor the air 24/7. And that keeps the industry in check. You cannot put one of those on each individual site around the Barnett Shale. So the industry needs to do all they can do on their own. I found it interesting that Mr. McAleer talked about you should look at lawsuits with skepticism, because FrackNation actually had a lawsuit in it. And this is a screenshot from that. This was actually taken from YouTube, so it wasn't taken from the film, so no copyright issues. It was taken off of YouTube, off a public website. So
I'm not the one who tried to shut down the film for copyright issues.
Mr. McAleer.
Just one. A number of Calvin Tillman's associates tried to shut down the
Mr.
film.
McAleer, it's not your turn to speak, please.
I should get a little extra time because he cut me off. So there was a scene in FrackNation where they showed the lease of Josh Fox, and they claimed that it was the wrong lease, and they made this big deal about how the film was fundamentally untruthful from the beginning. I'm sorry, Mr. McAleer, but you quoted the wrong lawsuit in your film. This is the anti-SLAPP lawsuit, not the lawsuit I get from Range Resources.
Are we talking about leases or lawsuits?
Mr.
I'm
McAleer.
confused. Are we talking about, no, seriously, I have a,
Mr. McAleer.
a lease or a lawsuit?
Mr. McAleer, you've had your turn, this is Mr. Tillman's turn.
Okay.
All right. You finished? All right, on behalf of Frack Dallas and our great appreciation to Brookhaven College Geotechnology Institute, I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank you, Mr. McAleer, appreciate it. Mayor Calvin Tillman. I hope you all learned something tonight. I'm sure there's still a lot of questions. Hopefully a few got answered. We still had a lot of questions you wanted to ask, but we just had too many for the time available. Just so everybody knows, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool Dallas Cowboys fan, and I gave up watching the Redskins-Cowboys game tonight to come here. And hopefully I'm going to get somewhere where I can see the second half of it. But I do appreciate you all coming out, and I hope you had a good time. I hope you learned something, and I thank you for your participation. I certainly thank you for obeying the rules 99% of the time and helping us get through this where we can maximize the benefit to you. So, yes, sir.
Dallas is winning 7-3.
All right. Good. That's a good way to wrap up.